We need to talk about the differences in men and women and in their lives, because in many ways, men absolutely do have what I would call a male privilege. It's not some socially constructed nonsense, however. I would call a male privilege being that men don't get periods, men don't have to bear children, and men can have kids way later in life than women can. This doesn't mean, I'm not trying to say that men or women have it better or worse, but certainly there are some things you could consider to be a male privilege. You could also contend that because of certain biological things, society has developed around protecting women in many, many ways, and thus there are certainly female privileges. Of course, feminists would argue with you, but the reality is there's pros and cons. It's hard to say that men have it better or worse. I think it's unfair to. Certainly there are many instances where you could make that claim, and certainly there are many instances where you could counter that claim. And of course, then, you have certain men's rights activists claiming that men actually have it worse. You have certain feminists saying women have it worse. You actually have most feminists saying that. I think there are some good feminists and good men's rights activists who point out that there's nuance to the discussion. It's not black and white. There are some things, I've had some conversations with feminists who have said that they understand women certainly have benefits and privileges, but they want to solve problems women face. And I say that's absolutely fine. I respect that. And there are men's rights activists who say, absolutely, men have it better in a lot of ways, but there are some things that, problems men face that need to be resolved. And I'm like, hey, that's a good thing too. Egalitarianism, equality, and fairness, right? So we have this story that I find fascinating. Taylor Swift deems question about motherhood sexist and refuses to answer. She was asked if she would like to be a mother someday and have children. I guess if that's just the question, I don't see why that's offensive, because it's a normal question to ask anyone, no matter how old they are, unless you're like 70, I guess. But she responded, I really do not think men are asked that question when they turn 30, so I'm not going to answer that now. Later in the interview, Swift said that young men and women in their 20s are looking to gain experience, try things out, fail, and make mistakes. I definitely plan to try and fail at things in my 30s as well, but I expect that in our 30s, we feel a little better of who we are. The closer I get to it, the more I feel it happens. So they mentioned that Swift was largely apolitical. And then I don't want to, she said, I've learned that society is constantly sending very loud messages to women that exhibiting the physical signs of aging is the worst thing that can happen to us. These messages tell women that we aren't allowed to age. It's an impossible standard to meet. Two things. Maybe she was asked if she wants to be a mom as she approaches 30. And if that was the case, it could be because women do have a biological clock that men mostly don't. So here's the thing. At a certain point, women can't have kids. And there's a certain age at which women are healthier and can have kids. Because of natural biological functions, evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology, social norms evolve around our actual evolution, our actual biology. Men can have kids way, way late in life. Because even if their reproduction fails 80%, they just need one of those little sperms to make it through and they can have kids. So yes, they can do it. Women can't. Women have a finite amount of eggs. It's my understanding. I'm not a biologist. I know there's going to be some nuance I'm going to get wrong. Some great, nuance is not the right word, but there's going to be some little facts and details I misunderstand. So the point is, men and women have different bodies, different strengths, and they age differently. Therefore, they will likely be asked different questions. I don't think it's fair, necessarily. I think, look, if you want to get offended, you can get offended at whatever you want. Fine. But then if you do, I will criticize you. So I think if someone wants to ask a woman who's becoming 30 if she wants to have kids or not, it's not an unfair question simply because men don't get asked the same things. Because I think, Sylvester Stallone had a kid when he was like in his 50s. A lot of guys do. You want to call it unfair? Fine. Absolutely call it unfair, but you can't change it because it's just literally biology unless, they do propose really weird things. Some woman tweeted something about literally, for every child a man has, they should remove a quarter inch of his, what? I kid you not, some verified Twitter user said that. Here's what's interesting. There was an op-ed piece written in the Washington Examiner by Suzanne Venker that says, Taylor Swift just proved my point about feminism's harm on millennials. She says, Taylor Swift, I'm going to skip that point, she said it. My last post was about feminism's harmful influence on millennials, and less than 24 hours later, a friend sent me this USA Today article that highlights an interview Taylor Swift gave on a promotional tour in which a German reporter asks Swift if she has children or family on her mind since she turns 30 this year. They say she responded with, I don't think it's fair. Suzanne writes, here's a news flash for Swift and other young women who didn't get the memo. No one asks men that same question because men don't have a biological clock. Women do. I know you've grown up believing since the day you were born that men and women are or should be sexual equals and should thus be treated as identical beings. But equality is a bogus mission because it's inextricably tethered to a progressive political movement that has no basis in reality. While I don't necessarily agree with everything she's saying, I will point out you have a different body. You have different bone mass, different muscle mass, different organs. There's so many biological differences between men and women. It exists. Is it fair that men have more muscle mass? No, I guess. But you could also argue that perhaps some men are upset that they can't bear children, and many people point out that it is the greatest privilege that women actually can do that. It's a philosophical argument, it's an argument of perspective. Along with having more muscle mass and men being able to have kids at a later age, also comes male disposability. This is also a scientific fact. If you have 100 men and 100 women, and 99 men die, your society can survive because that one man can impregnate all of these women, thus making men less valuable as individuals. The same isn't true if you invert it. If all but one woman dies, you are in serious trouble. The women must be protected. You could argue that is one of the greatest privileges, making women substantially more important than men, and thus men absolutely do feel disposable. Why do you not see then men arguing that it's not fair? So the point is, what I end up seeing from all of this is that femininity and motherhood is pushed down and considered less desirable. I think that's absolutely unfair to mothers and to femininity. Taylor Swift is not having a family in her 20s. She's now about to become 30, and she's saying it's not fair to ask that question. I think it is fair to ask that question. I think you'd ask the question to anybody. You could ask a young man why is he not married yet? Well, marriage is becoming less prominent as time goes on, partly because if you think about the roles men and women played throughout history, and I'm not defending them in any way, I'm not saying they should stay the same. No, they probably should change with technology and as society evolves, of course they do. But you'll see that there was a traditional a traditional femininity and a traditional masculinity. And so far, the change in society is moving everything much, much closer to masculinity. Certainly, masculinity itself is being attacked, and more masculine men are being called toxic and things like that. So there is a move towards this more androgynous middle, but for the most part, the cultural, what's associated with cultural femininity is being wiped away, and what's being associated with cultural masculinity is being maintained, though dampened. My point is, women are being told to do careers and do more masculine traditional roles. They're not ending gender roles, the feminists. They're actually just pushing everything towards patriarchal roles. It's a fascinating phenomenon. Again, you want to argue it's right or wrong, by all means go and do so. But I want to point out this story from 2014 to highlight the issue with what's not fair and can't be changed. Now, you can certainly argue that culture should change, but there's certain biological facts that make this data point true. Guys like women in their early 20s, regardless of how old they get. Someone recently posted this on Twitter, a feminist, and she said it wasn't fair. I would say you're right. It's not fair. The world isn't fair. The world is cruel and unusual. Here we can see a man's age versus the age of the woman who looks best to him. And there's a dotted line going up from 20 to 50. A 50-year-old man thinks 22-year-old women look the best. No matter how old they get, they still view the same age as the most attractive. What's even more fascinating is I don't know if Business Insider actually has the data on this. What's fascinating, and actually in my opinion kind of gross, is that when they rated women based on physical appearance alone and didn't know anything about them, men were actually rating 15 and 16-year-olds as the most attractive. And I actually think that's shocking and gross. But then you have to consider, when you look at models in like perfume ads, people don't realize those girls are like 15 or 16. I think the whole thing's gross. Because you build a culture that props up really young girls. Don't be surprised when you see this data. It may just be that humans naturally are attracted to that. Not me personally, I think it's weird. But looking at this data, one of the reasons that they elaborate on this as to why the most attractive age, it's not so much about looks, it's about cultural understanding that a teenage girl is not a good mate, right? So the point I'm trying to make is physical attractiveness for women, according to a study, peaked in their mid-teenage years, which I'm kind of like, whoa. But men also do take into account cultural behavior and intelligence. And that meant that they found 20 to 22 to be the most desirable age, because it means that the woman is still really young, but she's an adult who can understand the world. Women, on the other hand, want guys at or around their age, which is incredible. Now, women tend to want older men. We can see that a 20-year-old man wants a 20-year-old woman wants a 23-year-old man. But as they age, they actually do get to a point where they want people at or around their age. Now, older women do want slightly younger men, just because, youth is important for surviving, and as you get older, your survivability goes down. The point I'm trying to make is, I saw this story from Taylor Swift, and I thought it was kind of amazing to me that women are going on a male career track. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's a traditionally patriarchal role. The man would work and then retire. The woman would raise a family. Over time, women are now working and not having families. That's traditionally what men would do. We are not seeing feminism promote femininity. We're seeing it tell women to follow the male career track. If you want to argue, that's fine. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying that's literally what's happening. There are certain things that will always be unfair. You can't change that. Whether or not Taylor Swift wants to have a family, it's entirely up to her. She's free to choose whatever she wants. But don't be surprised when you look at data points and you have people saying, are you going to have a family? There's something that people refer to as the wall. I think that's kind of offensive, but at a certain age, women become less desirable for having a family because there absolutely is data to point out that the health of the baby is connected 100% to the age of the mother. So for biological reasons, men are attracted to certain ages. It's just the way it is. And if women want to say it's unfair, you got to find a guy who doesn't agree and thinks you're attractive at whatever age. But for women who say they don't want to have a family because it's not fair, well, you're arguing that God should change the world, right? And I mean that somewhat facetiously. Obviously, it's not God. It's just the way the dominoes fell. There are certain things about me and my body that I think are unfair. I grow facial hair. Shaving sucks. I hate shaving. That's unfair. Women don't got to shave their faces. But you could argue women got to shave their legs. They don't have to shave their legs. They don't got to show their legs to anybody. You can argue that men lose their hair. I lost my hair. That's not fair. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm just going to carry on my life and do the best I can. And so I think the most important lesson out of all of this is to realize, once again, life is not fair. Men and women are different. And I'll probably title the video something like that. So anyway, thanks for hanging out. I'll have more segments starting tomorrow at 10 a.m. youtube.com/Timcast. For those on the podcast, every day at 7 p.m. And I will see you all next time.